Awesome. Hi, everyone. Let me just get my screen share up here. And can you guys just confirm for me that you see that in front of you? Awesome. Okay. So before I go into further introductions and dive into this presentation, I really want to encourage you, to have a dialogue with me, to be interactive, interrupt me for questions. So to get the ball rolling, just a quick icebreaker. Can anyone tell me about a sustainable product that they recently purchased or something that they did that they felt was a sustainable action? And just chime in. I'm going to give it like 10 seconds. We got to get the ball rolling. Who's going to be the first? Anyone? This is going to be really fun, guys. Come on.
Okay, Claudia says I guess no one can unmute. Well, a couple people.
Oh.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that would be why. Sorry about that, everyone. You should all be able to chime in now.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
I can share. I just bought a new water bottle for this semester from Hydro Flask.
Awesome. Okay. Anyone else?
My mom bought these like forks that are like made of pasta. So then they like biodegradable, I guess, like kind of cool stuff.
Okay, great. Anyone else?
I bought a shirt that was made out of like scraps of like old material.
Great. Awesome. That's wonderful. So some of the key phrases that you guys have said is reusable, right, with the water bottle, recycled with the material, and biodegradable with the water. So we're going to kind of dig into what some of these phrases are, what they really mean, and how they fit into the broader sustainability umbrella. And I am so thrilled to be chatting about sustainability in business. It is a topic that I am incredibly passionate about. And my goal for today is to help clarify some key terms and concepts, and also some best practices so that you can all feel a bit more confident approaching sustainability as business owners, as part of teams. And I want to preface by saying that sustainability is an incredibly complex topic, and I'm going to cover a lot of ground very quickly, but I want to be able to save some room for questions and discussion at the end. But as I mentioned, I encourage you to chime in along the way now that we're unmuted, so that's great. And I also hope that you can walk away today with some really tangible next steps for how you can strengthen your personal ventures sustainability efforts, and really deeply integrate sustainability into the framework of your business. Oops, it would help if I was on the right thing. There we go. So who am I and why should you listen to me? That's a good question, right? So my name is Katie James. As Carolyn said, I graduated from Colgate in 2010, and I'm the founder of an organization called Storyroot. I've been operating in strategic communications and impact consulting for the past 10 years, everywhere from MetLife to Salesforce to Univision to the maker of Silk soy milk. So I've been in the industry for a while and really found my passion in sustainability, and I'm now further learning myself because this industry just moves so incredibly quickly, getting my master's at Columbia on the topic of sustainability management. So what my business does, just to kind of set in context my frame of reference, is I run a strategic impact studio, and we're really operating at that intersection between operations and brand. We design integrated systems to create really purpose-aligned brands as opposed to just purpose-led brands, and to power more meaningful connections with stakeholders. And I want to pause. Is everyone familiar with the term stakeholder, or is that something that needs to be defined for folks? Carolyn, I can't tell if anyone's chiming in. So, but just for frame of reference, stakeholders are essentially all of your audiences. So a stakeholder would be your employees, it would be your customers, it would be your suppliers. Really, there's a bunch of different stakeholders, and the difference between a stakeholder and a shareholder is a shareholder is an investor, so there's a financial kind of tie-in, versus stakeholders are that broader view of the audiences that you touch as a business. So here are a few of the companies that I've worked with. You might be familiar with Sir Kensington's, which is, you know, they have fancy mayo and really fabulous ketchup as well, if you're interested. But I want to start off today with a quick pop quiz. As I said, this is going to be very interactive. So my first question is asking what sustainability means to you. Anyone? Any thoughts? Any takers?
Yeah, I could take a stab at it.
Great game.
Maybe it's like your business is not doing as much harm to like the world. Like you're like the damage you do to the world, you're also doing good for the world, so it like evens out.
Okay, that's great. So you're trying to talk about really mitigating your negative impacts.
Yeah, there we go.
And highlighting your positive impacts. That's great. Okay. Anyone else want to chime in?
Or like slowing down your use of natural resources.
Great. Slowing down your use of natural resources. So both great answers. The most popularly sourced definition is this one, which came out of the United Nations Brundtland Commission back in 1987. And it really states that sustainability or sustainable development, which is it's also referred to as, is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So this is about resource conservation, right? We need to be able to deliver now and think about the future. So there's a long-term approach. And while this is the most popular definition, even it is criticized as being too vague and not providing guidance for how sustainability can become operational within a business. And why? Because sustainability is really a good concept that has been overused and often misused. And while half a century ago, when the term was defined, the core concepts were intact. But the word sustainability has become a real buzzword. And as you can see, it's come in and out of style since the early 1990s. This is a screenshot from an article from 1993, where it states that sustainability is the decade's newest buzzword. It's become really squishy. It's a feel-good catch-all for really doing the right thing. And even back in 2010, Advertising Age, which covers, you know, a lot of brands, called sustainability, this is one of my favorite, the jargoniest jargon word that they, quote, wish you would stop using. And even in 2015, there was a survey that nearly half of all consumers say they don't understand the word or feel it conveys anything important. So that's not a very high praise for the definition of a term that is becoming incredibly trendy. But there are also a lot of terms that fit into this world. So before we move on, I want to take a minute to clarify a few additional terms. Is anyone familiar with these concepts and want to take a stab at defining one of these acronyms?
I know ESG is used in the context of investing a lot. Like I've heard it in that. And I know G is like governance. I think E is I think E is environmental.
Yep.
I think S is socially responsible.
Yep. So ESG is environment, social, and governance. Awesome. Any takers on the other ones? Okay, so CSR is corporate social responsibility. ESG, as we mentioned, is environmental, social, and governance. And yes, it's often used in the frame of investing within the finance space. The triple bottom line and the 3 Ps both refer to people, planet, and profit. And it's showing that as a business, you can be more focused or more diversified than just focusing on your company as a profit engine. And that's really about taking into account those additional stakeholders, which we talked about. A few other terms that come into the world are green. One of the most recent ones, especially with the increase of the Black Lives Matter movement, is intersectional environmentalism. That one's a deep, heavy topic that could be a whole other session in and of itself, so I won't go into it. But the real takeaway here is that a lot of businesses are focusing on the nomenclature, what they call their sustainability programs, instead of doing what they should be, which is living by sustainability's proper meaning, which is practices that can be continued indefinitely. And that's practices versus programs, and continued indefinitely as opposed to a short-term endeavor. But at the same time, the attention being paid to sustainability by businesses has been increasing from, regulatory compliance back in 1970 to strategic action, and now more fully integrated sustainability practices where many businesses have made tangible commitments to using business as a, quote, force for good, which is a term that comes up a lot, especially in recent years. But since 2014, so over the last 6 or 7 years, global sustainable and environmentally responsible investment, to your point about ESG investing, is up 68% and now tops over $30 trillion US. So there's a big investment and a big push in recent years. And used properly, sustainability describes practices through which the global economy can grow without creating a fatal drain on resources. So back to the resources comment that was made earlier. And that includes environmental, social, and economic resources. Often sustainability is just considered as an environmentalist issue, but it's really a more broad, more broad meaning. And even more than just the resources, when implemented correctly within a business, sustainability has a much broader scope that helps to realize human potential equitably. And so this issue of equity is really important when it comes to sustainability as well. And as I'm sure you're all familiar with some of the brands that you've mentioned, aspects of sustainability range from plastics, water use, to health issues like the toxicity of products and ingredients used, to social issues such as diversity and equity and inclusion. And today it's become incredibly trendy, and that trendy use has pushed the term further and further from its origin. But it's our job as new sustainability leaders to really bring it back to its roots. And there's also a real business case and a reason for businesses to act more sustainably. Nearly 8 in 10 people indicate sustainability is important to them, and over 70% say they would pay a premium of up to 35%, which is a big profit increase, right? On average for brands that are sustainable and environmentally responsible. So awareness of global environmental issues and sustainability is changing, and with that, it's changing consumer habits and the way they live. So as they're continuing to change their habits, they are also seeking products and brands that align with their values and what they're looking for. So how do businesses act responsibly and sustainably? So let's first look at Patagonia and Sephora, which I imagine most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with both of these brands. And anyone who is, can you think about what the potential similarities and differences might be in how these two businesses think about sustainability, given what I've said thus far? Or one or the other. Just what do you think about Patagonia's sustainability program?
Well, from what I understand, Patagonia is a company that sells mainly its own brand, where Sephora has its own brand, but it also carries other brands. So I guess Sephora has to kind of make the conscious decision, what brands they decide to sell, are they necessarily ethical or sustainable, which in many cases some are, but some aren't. Whereas Patagonia has more control of their sustainability throughout the entire process from like creating to selling.
Yeah. So you're saying that Sephora has to source its products, right? Bring in other brands, where Patagonia, you're saying, has a little bit more control over the life cycle of its products, which are really important points, which we'll continue to touch on. Is there anyone else that wants to chime in?
Also, I would say that I feel like Patagonia's brand is relying on the fact that like outdoor activities will continue forever and be like something that everyone will want to do. So I feel like they need to think sustainably because their brand is kind of like all relying on that, whereas Sephora is like makeup, and obviously it has to do with it, but it's not as like central to their brand's mission.
Mm-hmm. So there's an alignment there in terms of where the product and service of the business is really inextricably linked to the, you know, viability of the planet, versus Sephora, which is just selling into a product space for a consumer need. Really interesting point. Anyone else? We'll take one more. Okay, we'll move on. What I really want to point out around the difference between Patagonia and Sephora, in addition to everything you've touched on, but there's a very real difference in how they talk and act sustainably. Patagonia's team, on one hand, is very, very careful to be specific about the sustainability initiatives that they're touting. So they use simple but very concrete and definable descriptions of products, like their recycled polyester fabrics. And they talk a lot about why those projects matter. And this kind of language gives customers a lot of faith, right? This brand has done their homework. They know what they're doing. They're transparent, and you can trust what they're saying and how they're acting. In contrast, Sephora has a clean filter for cosmetics, where, you know, you can sort through their, you know, you do a search for moisturizer and it'll pop up some 500 results. And then maybe you'll check the clean filter and maybe it'll shrink it down to 50 or 75. But clean is a very vague term, and it is a very commonly used term. And it takes some real digging to figure out what clean means to Sephora and more generally. And unfortunately, it's these really vague terms like clean that lead us to greenwashing. And before we talk about the right way to integrate sustainability into a business, let's acknowledge some of the pitfalls, which in and of itself is one of the most critical tenets of being a sustainable business. Is anyone not familiar with the term greenwashing? There are definitions all over this slide because I couldn't pick just one. So greenwashing is, as it says, when brands use marketing techniques to persuade you into believing their products are green and good for you when they may not actually be. And this is what I often think of as the underbelly or the dark side of sustainability. As these concepts become even more trendy, more businesses want to get in on the action, right? We've shown that there's a business case. The problem is that those companies don't always have the right motives for why they're acting sustainably, and are really quick to put sustainability on the back burner if it becomes inconvenient or does not benefit them significantly in the short term. For Sephora, for example, they could easily just turn off that clean filter and it would have no real difference to them as a business. Versus Patagonia, if they went away from their use of recycled polyester fabrics, it would tremendously alter the course of the types of products that they offer. So there's a level of integration. And that's when we start seeing brands as tone deaf, or worse, as greenwashing. So again, greenwashing is the misalignment between poor environmental performance and positive communication about environmental performance, where you're not having an honest portrayal of what your impacts are. And recently, there have been other terms that have come to the forefront, especially as we're entering this kind of cancel culture era, where woke washing is when a brand or individual does something that signals that they have an investment in addressing a social issue, but continues to cause harm to the marginalized communities that surround them. And this is often termed virtue signaling. It's often referred to as Columbusing. But again, these terms could have a whole other session in and of themselves, because it's a really dark, deep, and dirty world of sustainability today, especially within fashion. But the key here is that brands who avoid the use of greenwashing and are honest are seen as credible, and more credible than those who do use these jargon, clean, natural types of terms, right? Like you trust Patagonia's credibility. And as a business, getting it right is really, really difficult, and let alone even knowing where to start your sustainability journey. But the timeless adage states, you can't manage what you can't measure. And when it comes to sustainability, this is the first major lesson that I want you guys to walk away with, is you also have to manage the unknown and unknowables in order to really be a responsible business. We can't possibly know everything. We can't possibly measure everything. And a lot of those unknowns, the reason they exist, come from the need to manage your impacts across your business's value chain. Does anyone know the difference between value chain and supply chain, and might be willing to offer a difference?
I know supply chain is how is a process of sourcing your materials, and then the manufacturing of product, and then I guess likely delivery to consumer. And then I would assume value chain is the places along this path where like you gain value, I guess the transactional of a consumer. And then maybe it's tied into also the production, because you're creating value by producing goods, but not sure.
You're so close, really, really close. So supply chain is the coordination of your business functions within the organization and its channel partners in order to provide the goods and services to your customer, right? So it's that resource collection, it's the manufacturing, and it's the distribution to your customer. That's considered your supply chain. The difference between that and a value chain is a value chain looks at the full life cycle of a product. So if you look to the slide here, it includes what's called upstream of the value chain, which is, you know, the harvesting of your ingredients, the transportation of those ingredients or materials to your warehouse, how they're manufactured, how they're then sold and distributed to your customers, whether it's through a retailer, through a wholesaler, through e-commerce. Then it also includes these downstream components, which are the way your customer uses your product. Let's say you're Tide. Your downstream impact would be the fact that your customer uses a lot of water in the washing machine to use your Tide detergent. That would be included within your downstream value chain. And the last phase of that is the disposal, or what's called the end of life of your product. So is it recyclable? Is it actually compostable and biodegradable? Is it a reusable material? So we start having this conversation, which is why I picked this specific diagram around the change from a linear model to a circular model. And the circular economy is a really big concept that's evolving and becoming really critical for businesses to take into account. And the way the value, Matt, to your point, comes into the conversation is rather than just thinking about your supply chain and the value that you gain as a company, the value chain is about creating shared value for all stakeholders. So understanding what do you gain and what also do you generate for those along the way? Are you providing opportunities for your suppliers? Are you providing welfare to your local communities? So it really includes this give and take at every point in the process. So this is a really fun one. Why is measurement so important? Why do we think about these systems? How do we account for a full life cycle of a product? What do we need to know to fully understand sustainability and its implications for us as a business? So to kind of put this in practice and to take this theoretical value chain and make it digestible, I really want to take the topic of shopping bags. And I'm sure you are all aware of plastic bans, plastic straws, grocery store, is it paper or plastic? What's happening? So I'm going to ask the question, which is better for the environment? Paper, plastic, or a reusable tote bag? Oh, I can't hear you, Claudia. I see you talking, but I can't hear you. Oh, nope, can't hear you.
It said her mic was on, but I couldn't hear anything either.
Yeah. Do you have headphones in maybe that you thinks you're talking through? If you want to write something in the chat, then maybe Carolyn can. Awesome. Does anyone else want to chime in?
Pretty sure she said plastic.
She said plastic. Plastic is okay.
No, I'm just joking here.
Does anyone else want to chime in while Claudia's typing?
I was thinking reusable just because it sounds good, but my other thinking is it also depends on the user of because to create a reusable tote, it probably takes a lot of energy. And so if someone buys a reusable tote and then, uses it 2 times and loses it, or buys it and then doesn't really use it, then it sort of loses its value. And in that case, paper would be more efficient, is my thinking.
Great thinking. Anyone else want to chime into that? And then we'll go in. Thanks for sharing.
Claudia says, although reusable might be able to be used more often, the process of creating it and delivering might create more emissions and waste than any other kind of bag.
Great. So you're starting to think more with a systems approach. And this concept of systems thinking, I wanted to put straight on the slide to think about that full life cycle, which you're getting into. You've touched on both the upstream component, which is the creation of the tote bag, as well as the downstream component, which is the user, the way a customer might use that bag. Does anyone else want to chime in with some additional thoughts? Does anyone have a vote for plastic being better for the environment?
I feel like it could be reusable tote. It just has to be very specific, what type of fabric is used to make it. If you use I don't know, burlap per se, it would be more better off for the environment. And it's pretty dirty to have multiple use that you might not get from paper.
Yeah, great concept. So you're talking about the material input into the bag and whether it in and of itself, whether it's the harvesting of that material, whether that's, better or worse for the environment. That's a great. Anyone else? We'll take one more. All right, we'll move on. So the key here is that I kind of asked a trick question. The question, which is better for the environment, is inherently a flawed question because there is no one answer, because the planet is so incredibly complex and it really depends what our priorities are. So you made some really good points, right? A reusable tote is incredibly intensive when it comes to emissions to create, and you need to use it upwards of 150 times for it to break even in terms of the energy output per product. Paper as well is very water intensive. So if you're talking about water use, that might be a worse option for the planet. It also isn't very durable, right? On the flip side, plastic is actually the least emissions intensive, even though it's using a petroleum-based product, right? It's sourced from fossil fuels. But the key reason that plastic has been banned is not because it's worse for the environment as a generic concept, but it's because there are ocean plastics, right? And the detriment that microplastics, when the bag kind of breaks up after, because it's not very durable and it goes into the ocean, and then we have microplastics that, this is the science of sustainability, which is a whole other thing, but you can breathe it in. So there's a lot of issues on that front in terms of why we want to stay away from single-use plastic. And this is another really important thing when it comes to systems thinking. People have equated single-use plastic with plastic being bad as a material. Plastic is actually a really useful material in a lot of ways if it's being reused, because it's lighter than glass. You have to consider the emissions from transportation, right? So there's a lot of different factors that come into play here. And that's why plastic has gotten such a bad rap. But these are the real challenges, these types of nuanced systems, thought-provoking questions that businesses have to work through when they need to, consider the sustainability of their products and service. But the good news is no one is alone in getting through this complex process. There are a lot of frameworks and standards that have been created to help kind of steer the business ship towards sustainability. And this is what we call the alphabet soup of frameworks. There's B Corp, GRI, SDG, SASB, TCFD, IR, CDP. It's just a gobbledygook alphabet soup here. But these frameworks do outline very specific, replicable details and their requirements for businesses to focus on by industry. And they've been helping companies take action in the sustainability space since the late 1990s. GRI was founded in 1997. So these aren't new, they've been around. And they're incredibly powerful tools. But even, the user manuals for these to figure out what to do with them is incredibly complex. But what they do offer is a very useful repository of impact categories with very clear metrics and considerations for each. And this is why I wanted to make sure we were very clear on the definition of ESG and the broad notion of sustainability going in, because as you can see, there's economic, environmental, and social impacts, and they vary by each industry, by each business, right? Every business, though, has very finite resources, as I'm sure you all can appreciate as you think about your ventures. And we can't, in any world, try to tackle all of these at once. Even the best-in-class companies like Patagonia aren't doing all of this. And the quality of your sustainability program is not determined by reporting on all possible issues. What you do want to try is align your sustainability initiatives to your core competency as a business. No two industries are alike. No two sustainability strategies should be. And that's when integrating sustainability into your business needs to be specific to your product, your service, your industry, so that you can really focus on the business critical issues. And the more integrated your business's understanding of its impact areas, the better a brand or retailer or a service provider can apply that really valuable information into the design and development of their product. And that's when you start seeing real change from a sustainability perspective. And the beauty is that this is something you can all definitely begin to work on. In this world of sustainability, this is just prioritizing your efforts, and it's a concept called materiality. The key here is to reflect the topics that are both relevant to your organization, the industry, where you operate, where you can influence, as well as the impacts that are most relevant to the planet as a whole, and what's most critical to your stakeholders. So this stakeholder engagement component is just incredibly critical when we think about sustainability. No business operates in a silo. And this is an image that was pulled directly from GRI, one of those alphabet soup frameworks, but they really provide incredibly valuable tools. And here is what it looks like. This is called a materiality assessment, and you can begin mapping out, what's important to my stakeholders once I get to know them, what's important to the, environmental, social, and economic landscape in which I operate. So this is one of the critical tools that businesses use to define their sustainability strategies. But it's also an ongoing process. This is doing a materiality assessment isn't a one-time thing. And as we mentioned earlier, sustainability is a practice that can be continued indefinitely. Just like anything else that we practice, and we practice to improve. So how do you start? We've talked about a lot of different concepts: materiality, measurement, greenwashing, systems thinking, the value chain, continuous improvement, right? These are all really big, loaded concepts. And it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to integrating sustainability in business. This is what I do all day, every day, and narrowing it down even to this point is almost painstaking, because I feel in my gut that I'm still not doing justice to the full landscape of sustainability. But that is not to dissuade you. You can start to become a sustainable business. The key thing that you have to do as a business owner is first take a deep breath, and then just recognize that we all have an impact on the world around us. There's no way around it. Every choice we make can make a difference, and we have a choice as to whether that difference is going to be a positive one or a negative one. So as a starting point, I want to offer 3 fundamental questions that you can take away and spend some time really thinking about, because these are not yes or no answers. These are really thought-provoking opportunities to assess your business and how sustainable you are. And the first is around the difference between your intentions as a business and your impacts. This is what's called the value action gap, which is, you may claim that you want to be sustainable, but what are you actually doing? What communities are you really affecting? And oftentimes we don't spend the effort and the time to actually reflect on how even our best intentions might be causing unintended harm. So ask yourself, do my actions align with my values? The next concept, as we spent a lot of time talking about, is stakeholder involvement. And you can ask yourself, how effectively am I engaging my key stakeholders, suppliers, employees, customers, in my sustainability strategy? Your actions and your priorities aren't going to move the needle, even as a startup, right? You can get started thinking about, hypothetically, who might I want my customers to be? What do I know about them? Maybe I don't have any employees yet, but if I think about my partners or my advisors or my mentors, what might they think is important? And as you think about creating a product for the first time, what kind of questions can you ask your supplier about their priorities? What are the impacts they have? Where do they source their materials? And then once you have those conversations and an understanding of the key concerns, then you can have the buy-in and active participation from your stakeholders to really improve your sustainability efforts. And the last one is to find balance and ask yourself, how can I be open about what my sustainability strengths and weaknesses are? Owning your outcomes, for better or for worse, is one of the hardest things to do as a business, right? It feels risky to let people behind the curtain and let people know where we're failing and what our shortfalls are. But it's super critical in the world of sustainability to avoid greenwashing. This is where a lot of businesses go wrong. And if I can leave you with one final thought before I go into a few really tangible tools that have links of where you can go to find them, it's that there is really no such thing as a sustainable business. Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist at all. There are just businesses that are on a journey to continuously improve, mitigate the bad, and amplify the good impacts that they have on the world. So with that, I want to pause, ask if anyone has any questions. I have a few additional slides just with really tangible tools, but that is a lot of information, and I want to make sure I save some time for questions.
I have a question. For like a business that isn't like giving a good to consumers, like they don't have suppliers, like maybe they're like my venture is like an app. How would I, like what route should I take to be sustainable when I'm not really like creating anything that's tangible?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about the data intensity of having an app, right? Operating in the cloud. You can look at examples like Microsoft, aside from the computers, right? You think about the intensity of a data center and the types of emissions and energy that come from that. Even if you were a remote worker, right? We're all in this world of COVID, and I'm sitting in my house using electricity, using water, creating opportunities to meet with my neighbors and whatnot. So even as a service provider, you have to think outside the specific app that you're building and think about where your sphere of influence is. And what's really interesting about the value chain, even as a service provider, as opposed to a product creator, is if you think about who the local communities are, who are the customers using your app? Have you thought about creating an app that's accessible for different users? Have you thought about, even digital accessibility, and if someone is blind and they want to use your app? Those kind of pillars, even if you're not getting into the environmental impacts, are considered part of your sustainability strategy. So I would just encourage you to think outside the box around your immediate control of your app and think about what your sphere of influence might be.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Katie, I'm curious, when can I start marketing all the stuff that I'm doing so that I can sell more product and not get myself in trouble with the highly educated consumer, but rather like get the mass market consumer to think that I'm a better brand?
The honest answer is you could start tomorrow, but should you, right? What type of leader do you want to be, and what type of impact do you want to have? If we think about the existing capitalist structure, and I'm going to go down a rabbit hole to answer this one because this is a very challenging issue, right? The nature of business is to sell more, to create profit, which inherently means you need to increase your resources. But if we continue down that world or down that path, we will no longer have a world in which we can sell products, nor will we have people that we can sell our products and services to. So because part of why I personally love working with startups and I love working with young entrepreneurs is there's an opportunity to think differently and not go down the traditional modes of, this marketing around just what's going to get the big bucks and get them in the door. And because of this mapping of the way that the capitalist system is paying more attention to sustainability, right? That graph that I showed, as well as the attention and the tools that people have now to decipher the difference between whether you are meaning what you say and walking the talk, or if you're just talking for the sake of sales, it is very easy to lose trust. It is much easier to lose trust than it is to gain, and consumers will cancel you out if they find out eventually that you are just marketing for the sake of sales. So in the long run, it's much better to be thoughtful behind the scenes and focus on the broader value proposition that you offer, as opposed to just selling to get a quick win.
Katie, Claudia has a question. She asks, in terms of tangible ways to be sustainable, what do you recommend during a time when everyone is pushing for single-use materials in attempts to avoid infection and sharing objects with others?
It's a great question. And I spend a lot of my world working in consumer packaged goods and food. The reality is that plastics and single use are having a rebound, but the science does not necessarily support that is necessary, right? So there's science that there's an impression that single use is inherently more sanitary than a reusable tote bag. That's not true. Single use would have to be sanitized for it to be sanitary, right? If someone is holding your cup, it's no difference than they're holding your reusable cup. Starbucks just came out and said they're going to be reintroducing reusables. So I think from that's one side of it. The other side of it is that is just one concept within the world of sustainability, right? Is packaging. If you have to make a change to single use for the sake of the welfare of your customers, what are the other things that you should be doubling down on? And as I mentioned, when it comes to greenwashing, the companies that are more prone to greenwash are the ones that have these superfluous, surface level, philanthropic campaigns, donations, things like that, where they can easily pull back when it becomes inconvenient. Patagonia isn't just going to be undoing their use of polyester fabric, right? So that's just one piece of the broader sustainability puzzle. And there's many other ways you can continue to be sustainable, even if your use of single-use packaging has to have a subtle blip for the sake of, making it through COVID.
I actually had a question as well. So my partner and I, our mission is centered on sustainable fashion, and we really want that to be the core of our mission. So I'm just curious as to how do you think we can enable transparency between us and our consumers, and also making sure that they really understand that we're committed to this cause? Because I feel like sometimes when individuals go on websites to go shop, they're not necessarily looking to go to the sustainable section of the website. So how do we make sure that our mission gets across to our consumers outside of that section on the webpage?
Yeah, I think it's really important, and there's a lot of work being done to integrate sustainability more into the point of sale of e-commerce as opposed to just a separate entity. But the first thing that I want to say is I encourage you to become a sustainable fashion brand, but I would be careful about claiming that you are one.
Okay.
Because there is no such thing as sustainable fashion. It doesn't exist. It's why even companies like Everlane, which was kind of an angel child within the world of fashion because of their transparency around their suppliers. And they were like, look, we're doing things differently to be a sustainable fashion brand. And the reality is that they have terrible diversity and inclusion metrics. They treat their employees terribly. all of a sudden people started digging in and they lost their credibility and their trust because they came out the gate too strong, claiming that they were already sustainable, as opposed to acknowledging, you know, these are our strengths, these are our weaknesses. And you're more likely to get people to buy into your mission when you're able to say, you know, we source materials that come from this area, and we're tracking them in this way. And while it's a little bit harder to strike a balance, and it may be an additional challenge, being sustainable isn't easy. Talking about sustainability isn't easy, but when you put in the little bit of extra work to understand, you know, beyond just claiming that you're sustainable, what are the more tangible, concrete things that you're doing that people can really grab onto, you end up having more trust and more loyalty in the long run. Sustainability is kind of like a 1-2 punch, where always, regardless of what industry you're in, the quality and the functionality of your product will always come first. Sustainability is the additional piece that once you're able to walk the talk, that's where you get brand loyalty. That's where you get brand evangelists. That's where you get repeat purchasers that are really committed to helping your brand succeed. But you can only invite people into that type of dialogue once you reach out and figure out what are the things that your customers might feel is most important to them for you to have as a fashion brand.
Okay, thank you.
We can continue on too, and I will, we can ask a few additional questions. So these are just a few tools to help you get started. There's links of where to download this. This is actually one that I put together to address that first question that I asked, which is how do your values align with your business? A lot of people immediately think they can jump straight from intention to impact and know what their sustainability efforts are. But when you go around and you start actually unpacking all of the different concepts within sustainability, you end up getting a lot of clarity to answer those types of questions, like how do I create a brand that resonates with my customers when sustainability is core to my mission? When you get a little bit more clarity around what sustainability means to your brand, so that you don't just use the term sustainability, you end up having a lot more control and influence and buy-in for a brand. So this is something I encourage you to go download. The next thing is this business model canvas, which I don't know if TIA has walked you through, but it's essentially a strategic management and lean startup template to kind of refine and develop business models. It's a visual chart, but the version that I want to share is this one, which is the sustainable business model canvas, where it takes that existing business model and you start understanding how your sustainability pillars, what are the gains, what are the losses, who's the community that you're touching, and how do you get a single sheet visual of all of the different ways that sustainability plays into your business model, and thinking about how do you integrate impact model and business model so they become inextricably intertwined, and is really, really critical. And the last tool is one that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation issued as part of their circular design guide. So if you are creating sustainable fashion products, I'd encourage you to go to the product journey mapping and understand, you know, what happens when people use this product. What is the full life cycle? And is there an opportunity for you to go from a linear use of your fashion to a circular use? And perhaps that's the angle to sustainability that you take. But I'd also encourage you to think outside the box of using the term circular, because just as sustainable and organic and clean and natural have become jargonized, so has the term circular. So think a little bit more about what it is that you're saying and how do you take it from jargon to human speak when you start weaving it into your brand. So that is all I have. Any more questions?
Maybe you have time for one question if anybody's just dying to unmute themselves and doesn't want to leave this Zoom wishing that they'd asked something?
And I'm not
All right.
going anywhere. If you want to follow up after, feel free to email me.
Awesome. Katie, this has been really thought-provoking, mixed with real applicable stuff that I think these teams can start doing immediately. So thank you so much for this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Just everybody, really appreciate you you joining these webinars. I think this is number 6 or 7 at this point. We have at least one more slated on the calendar for the 19th. We're going to be talking about brand identity and brand promise. I'm guessing a lot of that ties into much of what we discussed today. And, you know, following up from this, we'll share some information, maybe some of those worksheets that you shared, Katie. And obviously, Katie will be available for any questions that you may have after this. So, you know, this has been great. I know this is always something that's really important to the entrepreneurs that come through the incubator. And you've given us a lot of the, I think, tools and language and mechanisms for thinking about how to be authentic and sincere about what we do here. So thank you.
And I know it's a very complex world to live in. And I think that even if you walk away saying, holy hell, that was a lot, and I don't understand what half of these terms still are, I think that means you're probably further along in your sustainability journey than most other people, which as a business owner is a great place to be.
Yeah, the notion that you are not a sustainable company, but like there's just this constant pursuit of, I don't know, being stronger, being faster, being more sustainable. Like there is no end. Like who are you to say, oh yeah, I'm a sustainable company? No,
Yeah.
you're not.
As soon as you claim a victory, someone else will be calling you out.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you, Katie. Thank you all for joining. Hope you have a great rest of the day and the week. And, you know, we're looking forward to a great start to the year. We're always available for any questions that you have on your ventures. I know we've been getting a few from you all throughout the last few weeks. So be safe. Have a great day, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Katie.